That's the message from Mayor Muriel Bowser, who says she would fight any plan to bring a detention center to D.C. for unaccompanied migrant children. Our Evan Kozlov joins us now in the studio with more on what Mayor Bowser had to say.
Yeah, she had some really strong messages right there, as you just said. Not in our city is the big message, but that's despite the fact that there are still a lot of questions about this facility, namely where the federal government wants to put it and how many children they actually want to shelter. One thing is clear, though, the mayor says she's going to fight it.
Mayor Muriel Bowser not mincing her words. In a statement, she wrote, "Washington, D.C. will not be complicit in the inhumane practice of detaining migrant children in warehouses." Continuing later, "We have no intention of accepting a new federal facility, least of all one that detains and dehumanizes migrant children." All this as the federal government looks into a D.C. shelter. The Washington Post reports that a federal contractor called Dynamic Service Solutions, based out of National Harbor, has applied to open the shelter. Online, WUSA 9 found job listings from the company, which appear to be connected to this proposed shelter. For now, details on this application remain sparse, but a person familiar to the application told the Washington Post that it may house as many as 242 children. And some members of D.C. Council have indicated it's the Tacoma area that may be the proposed home for the shelter. Councilmember Brandon Todd, who represents that section of D.C., took to Twitter to criticize the plan, saying, "I'm shocked and appalled at the proposal," adding, "I will do everything in my power to fight against this inhumanity."
Meanwhile, there's a similar battle brewing in Northern Virginia. The Department of Health and Human Services is looking to build a facility there as well. Top Democrats already have voiced their opposition. So it looks like we're going to have some local federal battles up ahead in D.C. and Virginia.
Well, Evan, a city that's facing displacement of its own residents and rising costs, people unable to afford to live here, sounds like the last place you would actually want to put a facility when you have ample other space in order to put it. But just in general, it's a very divisive issue, which causes a lot of people to object to it. At the same time, a lot of the primary reason why people object is because of the overcrowding, which these new facilities would help alleviate. So it's like a multifaceted issue right here. But as far as D.C. is concerned, that should be
well, we all knew there was going to be opposition here in D.C. It's a very liberal government, so naturally this was to be expected.
Fair enough. Thank you very much, Evan. For more on this story, go over to our website or download the new and improved WUSA 9 app. For right now, let's go to